You can't be serious. This is completely unacceptable. How could you approve this without my knowledge?
My name is Samantha Ray, and this is the story of how I was erased in public, then quietly rewrote the ending. It started on a Tuesday morning under the fluorescent lights of our company's all-hands meeting. The CEO's daughter, Kenzie, stood at the podium with her designer tote bag dangling from one chair. Her smile stretched tight, the kind of smile you only see on people who've never been told no in their entire lives. She cleared her throat, and in that nasal, over-rehearsed tone, announced my fate. "Enjoy the company hoodie and gift card," she said. Nasal, smug, like Botox hadn't settled right and was choking out basic empathy. That's when I knew it was happening. I was being fired in front of the entire company. No warning, no quiet meeting in HR, no chance to explain. Just a staged performance, sandwiched between an announcement about new kombucha flavors and a slide on the Q3 burn rate. The whole company watched. I folded my hands in front of me as though I were waiting for communion. Kenzie, I thought, the CEO's nepotism experiment in overpriced flats, is firing me in front of 46 people I've built systems with, bled hours with, carried crises with. She pretended to read from a script she definitely didn't write. Samantha has been a valued member of the Vyron family. She cooed the word family like she wasn't about to butcher me with a smile. The words that followed were even colder. But due to performance misalignment and shifting culture priorities, we've decided to part ways. Her manicured hand reached into one of the culture crates we usually hand to interns. Boxes filled with cheap company swag that scream, "We care," while costing maybe $12. Out came a hoodie, my name scribbled on the tag with Sharpie like I was a lost and found item. Inside the hoodie pocket, a $50 gift card to a juice bar that doesn't even exist in my zip code. She paused, oh so casually, and added, "And unfortunately, your Q4 bonus didn't meet the updated KPI rubric, so it won't be awarded." The updated KPI rubric. Lady, I wrote the original KPI rubric. In that moment, time slowed. I could feel 46 heads swivel toward me. Sales guys tugged at their collars. The intern row suddenly found their phones fascinating. Only the CFO sat there, face blank, silently broadcasting, "Don't drag me into this. I already bought a boat." It's strange, the kind of silence humiliation brings. It isn't quiet, it's loud. Like standing in the middle of a subway station and hearing only your own heartbeat. And yet, I smiled. Not because I wasn't furious, but because fury is for amateurs, and I am a professional. It was the same calm smile that makes HR people sweat deep in their granola souls. The kind of smile that says, "Don't worry, I won't sue, but you'll regret this." I lifted the hoodie. Scratchy polyester, judgment woven into the fabric. "Thanks for the memories," I said, my voice steady, friendly even, the kind of steadiness that unnerves bullies more than a meltdown ever could. Because meltdowns are what they want. A meltdown turns you into a meme in Slack. Proof you deserved the boot. But silence, composure, that's dangerous. I walked out. No slammed doors, no tears. Just the sound of my heels clicking against the tile floor. The smell of vanilla air freshener lingered, cheap perfume masking deeper rot. Behind me, the room exhaled in awkward relief, the way people do when they've just watched a public execution and are grateful it wasn't theirs. No one noticed the most important detail. HR hadn't asked me to sign anything. No exit packet, no NDA reminder, no formal acknowledgement that my termination was legal. Just a perky pre-written email saying my account would be deactivated by 3 p.m. and good luck in your future endeavors. That was their mistake, and my opening. See, this wasn't just about me. According to a 2023 Gallup study, 57% of U.S. workers say they don't trust their company leadership to act in their best interest. Over 30% of layoffs are mishandled. Sloppy paperwork, vague language, legal shortcuts. Most employees walk away, devastated, unable to fight back. But I wasn't most employees. Kenzie had been gunning for me since she floated into the role of Chief Culture Officer, a title that basically meant professional bruncher with access to payroll. She didn't like that people trusted me. She hated that I had history. She despised that I'd flagged budget inconsistencies, like $18,000 labeled wellness experience, that somehow mapped to her Palm Springs bachelorette party. I had influence, she had envy. So she cut me down in public, hoping to erase me with a hoodie and a juice card. But what she didn't know, the thing that made my smile so calm, so terrifying, was that 3 weeks earlier, I had already prepared for this moment. I had insurance, and not the kind you get from HR, insurance written into the very bones of the company's operations. Insurance buried in a clause no one bothered to read. Insurance that meant when Kenzie fired me without due process, she hadn't just ended my employment, she had detonated a $50 million time bomb under her father's empire. And as I walked past the glass offices, the break room cake, the pity smiles, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. 3 weeks before the hoodie, I was in a booth that smelled like old fries and cheaper secrets. The kind of bar where the neon beer sign flickers like a bad alibi. My laptop was open, a glass of Pinot teetering too close to the trackpad. Across from me sat Shelley, my attorney, real attorney. 42, cynical in a way that meant she still cared, and wearing pearls like brass knuckles. She didn't waste time on small talk. "You sure you want to do this, Sam?" she asked, leaning in to scan the screen. "There's no partial pull. This is a ripcord." I took a slow sip and nodded. "They treat me like an employee," I said, "but I've been acting like an owner. Owners buy insurance." The cursor blinked on a PDF draft titled Clause 12, 7b, Reversion of Use License Upon Improper Termination. It didn't look like war, it looked like punctuation, a single paragraph in clean English with teeth embedded in every comma. Let me explain what I built and why it mattered. Vyron's back end used to be a museum of duct tape. Third-party tools scavenged and Frankensteined together, API calls written during caffeine panics, vendor dependencies layered like a lasagna, no one admitted cooking. When the company needed to scale, I cut the mess out like scar tissue and rebuilt the spine. Clean, modular, secure, not flashy, fundamental. But here's the surgical twist. I built it through my LLC, Ray's Integrated Systems, a vendor that had been on our ledger for years under the unsexy label of Ops Architecture and Platform Integration. No one noticed the invoice headers evolving. No one blinked when a statement of work rerouted licensing to my LLC with a perpetual use license contingent upon my continued employment without improper termination. The clause was simple enough to be undeniable, obscure enough to be invisible. Legal stamped it with the distracted efficiency of a Tuesday afternoon. "Walk me through the triggers again," Shelley said, an eyebrow arched like a cross exam. No review, no cause, no paper trail. Correct. I scrolled to the bold line. Revocation is immediate upon termination. Absent formal review, documented cause, and executed acknowledgement by key personnel. I was the key personnel by name. We added a definition section so plain even a motivational poster could understand it. If they fired me with nothing but a vibes diagnosis, lights out. Clean, Shelley murmured. Sharp, you tested it? I had, first in a sandbox, then in a simulated deployment with our external counsel. Names redacted, environments spoofed, credentials rotated. Every check returned green. Our compliance team, overworked, underpraised, filed the licensing entry like just another vendor line item. No memos, no escalations, no red tape. The best hiding place in a busy company is a perfectly normal page. There's a phrase you hear in boardrooms, trust, but verify. What I learned doing operations is harsher. Verify, because trust is a slogan. I printed one copy of the fully executed contract and locked it in a fireproof safe beside my grandmother's will. Digital copies were AES 256 encrypted, backed up in 2 places, a cold drive abroad and a lipstick-sized USB tucked beneath the false bottom of my desk drawer. Paranoid? Ask anyone who's ever been reorged by someone with a ring light and a title containing the word culture. Sam, Shelley said, tapping the screen, this isn't revenge, this is governance. I wanted to believe her, and mostly I did, because I wasn't setting a trap for a good faith company. I was documenting ownership in a place where ownership was treated like confetti. In the months prior, Kenzie had floated down from the balloon of nepotism and declared herself Chief Culture Officer, a role with authority vapor and accountability zero. She installed scented candles on the 2nd floor and called layoffs emotional recalibrations. She billed a $900 team connection ceremony, a drum circle with name tags, and called it strategy. Meanwhile, my budget requests for redundancy testing got parked. There's a statistic you won't see on recruiting pages. According to a 2023 workplace study, middle managers spend over 40% of their time mitigating leadership mistakes from above and process rot from below. That's the quiet labor, the scaffolding nobody claps for. I did the numbers, the bedtime stories, the 2 a.m. incident bridges, the vendor handshakes, and then I watched credit migrate to pastel slide decks that said scalable empathy while my engineers patched the bleeding edge. So I wrote a clause that didn't roar, it whispered. Later that night, I walked Shelley through the architecture map. Microservices labeled with my convention, vendor flows obfuscated just enough to prevent casual pilfering, and a license check that phoned home to my LLC's key server at startup. Not to break production, never that, but to confirm lawful use. If the key went dark after an improper termination, the system would degrade gracefully, not catastrophically. Cued non-destructive fallbacks, read-only toggles, and a friendly but legally explicit banner in admin consoles. License authorization pending. Contact vendor. Read, call me, or call counsel. You're giving them an off-ramp, Shelley said, sounding almost proud. An off-ramp is cheaper than a pile-up, I said. This isn't sabotage, it's signage. We tightened the indemnity language, cross-referenced the vendor consolidation packet, and embedded the key phrase named key personnel everywhere it needed to be. Agreement body, exhibit, and metadata. I sent a courtesy copy to external counsel under the most boring subject line I could conjure, Exhibit H crosswalk, because nothing dies faster in a corporate inbox than something that looks like homework. I went home and sat in my attic, the old house timber, breathing like a tired chest. I opened the safe, placed the paper copy beside the deed to my car, and closed the door. The dial clicked like a heartbeat settling. I didn't want to use any of it. I liked my job, the systems of it, the way a company hums when invisible processes align. But disliking politics doesn't stop politics from liking you. And Kenzie, she had the appetites of a monarch and the attention span of a tap. In the days that followed, her tells got louder. My monthly ops report accidentally vanished from the agenda. My budget approvals rerouted to a culture committee populated by her yoga friends. Once I arrived at a strategy session to discover my chair missing, physically wheeled into the hallway like a punchline. In response, I started cataloging everything, not out of malice, out of memory. Because institutions develop amnesia when it's convenient, and documentation is the only cure. Here's another quiet truth. Competence provokes insecurity. When I flagged a line marked wellness experiences that matched the timing and cost of her Palm Springs bachelorette weekend, I got a chirpy note from HR about positive forward momentum. I thanked them, made tea, and saved the screenshots. When I noticed Q4 bonuses flagged for compliance delay, while a new vendor called Kenzie Loves Balance received 4 event coordination transfers, I printed the raw disbursement logs and slid them into a folder labeled Petty Cash and Petty Queens. I wasn't waiting to strike, I was waiting to survive. One evening, well past midnight, I sat alone in the kitchen, blue light soft on the tiles, and ran the clause through my head like prayer. Improper termination triggers immediate revocation. HR loved vagueness. Vagueness is a fog you can lose people in. My clause craved daylight. Review, cause, acknowledgement. Boxes that either get ticked or they don't. If they fired me on vibes, they flipped the switch themselves. If they followed due process, the license held. Fair is fair. I didn't tell my team. The junior PM who brought me roadmaps with her coffee, she would have defended me to the bone, and that wasn't a burden I would put on her. The DevOps contractor with the good jokes and better bash scripts. He needed a paycheck more than a crusade. When you build guardrails, you don't announce them. You just make sure they're there when the car drifts. On the third meeting with Shelley, she closed her laptop and looked at me for a long moment. "You know what this is?" she asked. "It's an antidote to a disease that keeps getting misdiagnosed as culture." I laughed, small and tired. "It's also a mirror," she nodded. "Then make sure it reflects exactly what they are." So I did the unglamorous things, rotated keys, notarized signatures, synced timestamps to an independent service, and archived the hash of the final PDF in a private repo controlled by my LLA. I left nothing to interpretation because interpretation is where the powerful go to turn facts into fog. The night before the all-hands, I found myself staring at a blank spot on my living room wall, where the afternoon sun paints a rectangle every day at 3:10 p.m. I tried to remember the first time I felt small in that building, and whether I mistook survival for belonging. In another life, I might have asked to be seen. In this one, I made myself necessary, and then I wrote the necessity down. There's a line I keep taped inside my notebook. Build things that don't require your presence to demand your respect. That's all the clause was in the end. A way of saying if you throw the architect out for being inconvenient, don't be surprised when the lights dim. Not a bomb, a boundary. So when Kenzie lifted that hoodie like a prize and smiled for the story she wanted to tell about me, I smiled back for the story she didn't know I'd already written. Because insurance doesn't just pay out after disaster. Sometimes it prevents the wreck. And sometimes, if the reckless insist on driving blind, it makes sure the bill goes to the right driver. I closed the laptop in that bar with the neon sign. The Pinot didn't spill. Shelley squeezed my hand once, professional, fierce, and said, "If they choose the fog, let the sun do its job." It did. To understand how Clause 12, 7b ever became necessary, you have to understand Kenzie. Kenzie was the daughter of our CEO, a woman who floated into the building on the helium balloon of nepotism. She had no resume, no track record, not even the scars that come from late-night firefights with broken servers. One day she simply appeared with a shiny new title, Chief Culture Officer. That role was a palace built of pastel buzzwords, authority without accountability, power without proof. The second floor soon smelled like eucalyptus candles, every wall plastered with framed quotes about radical alignment and scalable empathy. She hosted vision board sessions, live-streamed her morning gratitude rituals, and carried an oversized water bottle stamped with motivational time marks. Crush it. Almost there. You're basically Oprah. But beneath all the pastel and platitudes, she had an agenda, and that agenda had my name on it. It started small, as these things always do. My monthly ops reports began to accidentally vanish from meeting agendas. Budget approvals I used to handle directly were rerouted to her newly formed culture committees, stacked with her yoga classmates. My name was quietly scrubbed from key Slack threads. Even my chair and strategy meetings went missing once, literally wheeled into the hallway like a bad joke. Kenzie never attacked head-on. That would have required a spine. Instead, she wielded the twin weapons of passive aggression and vague jargon. In a meeting, if I raised a concern about financial leakage or a vendor delay, she'd tilt her head and purr. Let's reframe that energy. If I pushed further, she'd say things like, "I think Samantha's perspective is rooted in a scarcity mindset." Scarcity mindset. That was her glitter glue diagnosis for every time I tried to keep the company solvent, while she billed another $900 for a team connection ceremony that turned out to be a drum circle in the break room. The vendetta was unmistakable. My competence was a mirror she couldn't stand to look into. Every time I pointed out a flaw in her initiatives, like the employee empowerment stipend that turned out to be a Venmo transfer to her college roommate for motivational stickers, she would smile, tight and condescending, nod like I was a cute relic, and say, "Samantha brings an important legacy lens to things." Legacy lens, as if I were a fax machine that still somehow functioned. So I started documenting everything, every deleted Slack message, every accidental double payment to one of her wellness vendors, every payroll anomaly. The patterns emerged faster than I expected. $40,200 to an emotional environment consultant, who after some digging turned out to be a DJ from Coachella. A $15,000 wellness retreat that aligned exactly with her Palm Springs bachelorette weekend. A line item called Vendor Balance Enrichment that suspiciously matched her mortgage payments. I created color-coded folders, time-stamped backups, cross-referenced cloud drives with fake project names, screenshots, PDFs, even screen recordings of her calling layoffs, emotional recalibrations, and suggesting we offset the morale hit by handing out succulents. I wasn't collecting evidence for revenge. I was collecting it because I knew, sooner or later, she'd try to erase me. When HR invited me to a quick mediation with her, chirping about realigning communication styles, I smiled the kind of smile that makes HR sweat. I'm aligned, I told them. I'm just not compatible with delusion. Here's the thing about companies like Vyron. They don't reward competence. They reward confidence theater. And Kenzie was a virtuoso performer. In blog posts, she began taking credit for the very systems I'd built. She described streamlined vendor architecture as if she'd been the one to renegotiate contracts. She gave interviews where she spoke about integrating operational flows, the very platform I'd architected brick by brick. But what she didn't know, and what gave me quiet satisfaction, was that every time she bragged about those systems, she was bragging about something my LLC legally owned. She was polishing a crown that wasn't hers to wear. The irony is, I never wanted a war. I wanted efficiency, clean processes, a company that worked like a well-oiled engine. But Kenzie didn't want co-pilots. She wanted erasure. And every time she smiled with those bleached veneers and called me Sambeam, I felt the countdown ticking. According to a Harvard Business Review study, 75% of high-performing employees leave companies not because of workload, but because of toxic managers who undermine their contributions. I wasn't going to be another statistic. I wasn't going to hand over years of work to someone who saw competence as a threat. So I built my insurance quietly, carefully, and then I waited. Because the thing about people like Kenzie is that they always overplay their hand. And when she finally did, firing me in public with a hoodie and a gift card, I didn't need to rage. I didn't need to scream. All I had to do was open a folder and let her own arrogance pull the trigger. The night before it all came crashing down, I was still working late. Though I didn't know, then it would be my last night as an employee. My laptop glowed in the dark kitchen, casting long shadows across unpaid bills and half-drunk mugs of tea. Something in the Q4 bonus allocations smelled wrong. We were under budget, yet the bonuses came in light, so light they felt hollow. Compliance delay, the memo said, but delays don't explain missing money. I dug deeper, line by line, payroll ledgers, vendor invoices, raw disbursement logs. I cross-referenced against project closeout reports, and then it appeared on my screen like a rat skittering out from behind the fridge. A series of Venmo transfers, labels, event coordination, ops celebration, amounts that totaled $18,750. Recipient name, Kenzie Loves Balance. At first, I thought maybe it was some placeholder vendor ID. Happens sometimes when personal accounts get used for onboarding. Dumb, but fixable. I pulled the vendor invoice ID. Nothing, no record in bill, commas, no corresponding vendor entry. Just a line item with a fake code, approved manually. By her. Kenzie had overridden the bonus allocations to ops, diverted them to this ghost vendor, and transferred the funds to herself. She labeled it Employee Enrichment Initiative. The initiative where she enriched herself. I didn't slam my laptop shut. I didn't draft a furious email. Instead, I printed it. A real piece of paper, ink on page, warm from the machine. I slid it into a manila folder labeled Petty Cash and Petty Queens and placed it neatly on my shelf, right next to my grad school textbooks. Sometimes you don't rush evidence, you let it marinate. Because I knew her blade was coming, and when it did, I wanted mine polished. The next morning, HR called me into a quick sync. Their office smelled of lavender and cowardice. Kenzie was already there, latte in hand, rehearsed sadness painted on her face. The HR rep, Rachel, looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days. She cleared her throat and began to read. Samantha, we've noticed a pattern of interpersonal friction and sustained negativity that is beginning to impact the culture at Vyron. As such, executive leadership has decided to move in a different direction. Negativity. The word sat there like a diagnosis handed down by someone with no medical license. Kenzie nodded solemnly, like she was officiating a funeral. I know this is hard, she added, crocodile tears barely pooling. But sometimes a fresh start is a blessing in disguise. I stared at her for 5 long seconds, long enough for her to shift in her ergonomic chair, her latte foam trembling. Do I need to sign anything? I asked Rachel. She panicked, flipping through papers. No, we'll follow up with a digital exit packet. No immediate signatures required. Good, that's how I knew they'd skipped the process. No documentation, no review, no cause, just vibes. And vibes don't hold up in arbitration. I stood, calm, no protest, no theatrics. I walked out slower this time, not because I was sad, but because I wanted control, the way a queen leaves a burning palace. Back at my car, I opened my personal laptop, tethered it to my phone's hotspot, and dragged 2 files into an encrypted folder. First, the bonus theft report. Second, Clause 12, 7B trigger, PDF. The first I attached to an email for Shelley, subject line, Kenzie's retirement fund. The second I uploaded to a private Git repo under my LLC's account. A version-controlled time bomb with notarized IP ownership already logged. I didn't need to scream, I'll get you. My documentation was already ticking. Here's what people forget about power. Silence terrifies it. Rage they can spin. Tears they can dismiss. But silence. Silence means you're working. Silence means you have something stronger than words. I ghosted them. No LinkedIn update. No emoji-filled goodbye post. No cryptic subtweets. Nothing, just absence. And in toxic workplaces, absence is the loudest noise of all. Meanwhile, I knew the due diligence for Series B funding had already begun. $50 million on the line, every spreadsheet, every vendor contract, every line of code I'd touched would soon be under a magnifying glass. Except now there was no me. No one to explain why Vendor 6A had a 72-hour lead time unless you bribed the scheduler with Girl Scout cookies. No one to decode my 2-step audit process for revenue reconciliation. No one to keep the gears greased. The investor spotlight was about to turn on them, and I had already flipped the switch that would burn the stage down. When the hoodie was already crumpled in my trunk, and my employee badge no longer beeped me into the building, I thought maybe the storm would pass me by. Maybe they'd stumble, patch the gaps, limp through the investor diligence with duct tape and buzzwords. But corporations aren't living things, they're machines. And when you remove the one person who knows which screws hold the engine together, the whole thing rattles until it shakes itself apart. Behind the glass tower walls of Vyron, the countdown began. Monolith Capital had already started due diligence for the Series B, $50 million at stake. To the execs, this was the coronation, the leap from scrappy disruptor to serious player. To the analysts combing through spreadsheets, contracts, and vendor maps, it was a stress test, and Vyron failed almost instantly. The finance team sent out a corrected revenue projection, off by $1 million. They blamed QuickBooks API delays, but the truth was simpler. No one understood the two-step audit process I'd built. I hadn't given them the playbook. Why would I? You don't hand blueprints to people who are building your guillotine. Then came the tech unraveling. 3 microservices collapsed like Jenga blocks. The DevOps contractor, Kenzie's hand-picked darling, hired after a vision board session, couldn't troubleshoot it because the back-end schema used my naming conventions, not hers. Everything was documented, but not in their repo. It lived in mine, Ray's Integrated Systems LLC. Clause 12, 7B made sure of that. Kenzie went on the defensive. In the weekly leadership video, she called it a growth recalibration phase, and insisted the team was reclaiming operational sovereignty. That's corporate code for we have no idea what we're doing, but we're going to brand it like a spa retreat. KPIs slipped like ice on tile. Vendor SLAs missed. Onboarding timelines doubled. Customers started tweeting. Investors noticed. Kenzie blamed legacy resistance. She said the team wasn't fully embracing the new vision. She said this in a Slack town hall while wearing a sweatshirt that read, "Bomb do the work." I laughed so hard coffee shot out my nose. HR tried damage control. They spun it as legacy architecture issues. But the truth was brutal. I was the architecture. They hadn't fired an employee. They'd amputated their backbone. Every missed deadline was a crack in the foundation. Every investor inquiry about back-end reliability was a sledgehammer. And every time Kenzie opened her mouth, she shoved more dynamite under the floorboards. Monolith's analysts weren't fools. They asked questions, highlighted missing processes in yellow, circled incomplete integrations in red. The boardroom smelled less like power and more like panic and sugar-free Red Bull. Meanwhile, I was in my kitchen baking banana bread, sunlight cutting across the counter at 3 p.m. I wasn't in the fire anymore. I was holding the matchbook. Here's the thing about silence. It's louder than noise. I didn't tweet. I didn't leak. I didn't text my old engineers with, "I told you so." I let the wrong people talk long enough to bury themselves. And Kenzie, she was practically handing out shovels. One Thursday, exactly a week before Vyron's big investor pitch, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally, I'd let it slide to voicemail. But something about the area code, Bay Area Corporate, made me curious. "Hi, is this Samantha Ray?" The voice was stiff, brittle, a man trying to sound casual while sweating through his shirt. "This is Alan Brewster, outside counsel for Vyron. I was hoping to informally ask if you might be open to consulting on a few time-sensitive vendor matters." I let silence stretch until his breathing hitched. Then, "I'm not available for informal anything." He stumbled. I understand. We're in final pitch prep, and certain items you previously managed have gaps. Gaps. Cute word for holes the size of craters. I didn't ask which. I already knew. The automated vendor flow system, undocumented except in my repo. The workaround I'd coded for a supplier's Tuesday portal crashes, flagged months ago but ignored. Knowledge doesn't transfer by osmosis, but Kenzie thought culture scaled better than competence. Alan thanked me weakly and hung up. That night, I poured a glass of 12-year scotch, the kind you save for goodbye forever moments. I opened my filing cabinet and pulled out a crisp letter on weighted stock. My LLC's letterhead stamped across the top. Title: Formal Notification of Clause Activation 127B. It was simple. Due to my termination without cause, review, or documentation, licensing rights to the back-end systems were revoked effective immediately. Access unauthorized as of the timestamp on delivery. I slid it into a certified envelope addressed to every board member. Not email, not Slack. Not a PDF attachment. Paper, tangible, legal, undeniable. A mirror, not a bomb. I knew what would come next. Confusion, panic, denial. Someone would blurt, "What the hell is Clause 12, 7B?" Kenzie would scoff that it was nothing. But the lawyers, the ones who actually read contracts, they would remember, they would know. And when the boardroom lights blazed for the Series B pitch, they wouldn't just be pitching vaporware. They'd be standing on a floor I had just pulled out from under them. The morning of the Series B pitch, Vyron's boardroom gleamed like a cathedral of glass and hubris. 27 stories above the bay, the table stretched long and glossy, the kind of surface you'd expect to see in a Bond villain's lair. For the board, this was supposed to be the day they proved Vyron wasn't just a startup. It was a force. For me, it was the day silence would finally speak. I had been invited, not by them, of course, but by Gregory Watts, lead investor from Monolith Capital. He insisted I attend for continuity. The board, too frazzled to think strategically, agreed. Kenzie hadn't been told. The way she flinched when she saw me in the lobby told me her soul tried to escape through her pores. She arrived dressed for her coronation, cream blazer, designer heels, oversized motivational water bottle, and a clicker in her hand like it was a royal scepter. She smiled into the room as if it were already hers. "Thank you for joining us," she purred, tapping her slides into motion. Her PowerPoint was a parade of animations and buzzwords. Scalable empathy, culture-forward architecture, emotional throughput. She stacked them like a Jenga tower. Not a word about system stability. Not a word about the back-end stack. One Monolith analyst raised an eyebrow. In investor language, that's a full-body scream. Meanwhile, Gregory flipped slowly through his diligence folder, page by page. He didn't interrupt. He just let her dig. Then, halfway through a slide, on the next chapter, Kenzie's phone lit up, face down beside her green juice. 12 missed calls, 2 voicemails, a flood of notifications from the board group chat. She glanced, swallowed, and her voice cracked as she said, "And we believe our culture is our moat." Gregory raised his hand, calm as a surgeon. "Before we go further, can we clarify something?" Kenzie froze mid-slide. "Of course," she said, her voice an octave higher. Gregory held up a sheet of paper, a printed termination memo, my termination memo. This states that Samantha Ray was terminated for negativity and misalignment with culture. Was this termination reviewed by counsel? Kenzie's mouth opened, closed. The CEO, her father, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. HR handled the process, he muttered. It was a culture fit issue. Gregory didn't react. He turned to the next page. A letter with my LLC's letterhead. Title bold across the top, Clause 12, 7B notification. The room went still. This document, Gregory said, revokes all back-end platform licensing, effective the moment Miss Ray was improperly terminated. No formal cause, no review, no documentation, immediate breach. Kenzie's knuckles went white on the table. The general counsel, pale as plaster, shot out of his chair and snatched the letter from Gregory's hand. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Where did this come from?" I answered, calm from the back row. "I drafted it myself. Your department signed off during last year's vendor consolidation." Gregory glanced at me, then back at the table. "Meaning," he said evenly, "when you terminated Miss Ray, you also terminated your license to operate your core infrastructure." You could hear the breath leave the room. The CTO buried his face in his hands. The VP of sales walked to the window, staring down like he might swan dive into the next startup. The CEO fumbled for his water glass, missed, and nearly spilled the whole pitcher. Kenzie squeaked, a sound like a balloon losing air. "This is just a technicality," she tried. "No." Gregory's tone sharpened. "This is ownership." He pointed at the presentation screen still glowing with her roadmap. "You're pitching investors on a product that legally no longer belongs to you. That's not a technicality, that's fraud." Silence thickened, choking. The CFO looked like he was about to vomit. The VP of Growth muttered, "She warned us. I remember her warning us." And I just sat there, neutral, no smirk, no gloat. Just a woman waiting for her coffee order, while an empire collapsed under the weight of one forgotten clause. Because justice doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it looks like a paragraph in legalese, waiting for arrogance to activate it. The boardroom dissolved into chaos. Voices overlapped, chairs scraped, legal binders flipped open, with frantic fingers searching for a loophole that didn't exist. Someone threw a pen. The CFO whispered to no one in particular, "It's over." The CEO slumped in his chair, pale, chest heaving as if gravity had just remembered him. And Kenzie, oh Kenzie, flailed with a kind of performative urgency, insisting, "We can fix this, right? We'll just talk to her lawyer." But no one was listening. The board members had already turned on each other, their empire crumbling not with fire, but with paper. I stood slowly, hoodie folded neatly under my arm like a souvenir. I didn't need to look back. My footsteps echoed on glossy tile as I passed the catering table. For one quiet moment, I paused beside the trash can. The company hoodie, cheap polyester, logo screen printed like a participation trophy, slid from my arm into the bin. I didn't watch it fall. Outside, the hallway was bright, cold, and peaceful. The kind of silence you only feel when you've walked away from a war you've already won. My phone buzzed. A new email. Subject line, "Let's talk acquisition, your terms." I exhaled. Not exhaustion, release. Because when someone tries to erase you with a $50 gift card and a fake smile, there's only one response: build something they can't replace. Here's the thing, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns out. What I felt was cleaner, sharper, restoration. I hadn't destroyed them, they had destroyed themselves. All I had done was hold up a mirror. And maybe that's the philosophy we forget. In the grind of corporate survival, we think power comes from shouting louder, playing dirtier, or clinging harder. But real power is quieter. It's the system you build that outlasts slogans. It's the contract you write that defends itself when no one else will. It's the silence you hold while arrogance buries itself. To anyone listening who has ever been humiliated in a meeting, underpaid for your brilliance, or erased by someone who couldn't survive without your work, remember this: you are the architecture. They may cut you out of the picture, but they cannot stand without the frame you built. My story isn't just about revenge, it's about value, the kind no culture officer with scented candles can erase. Because when you've built something real, irreplaceable, it doesn't matter how many pastel blazers strut across a boardroom. Paper beats power, documentation beats lies, and quiet beats noise every single time. So to my audience, thank you for walking this path with me. I hope you carry away more than entertainment. I hope you carry strength. May you and your families stay healthy. May your work be respected. And may your quiet brilliance never be underestimated again. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe so we can keep the coffee pot brewing and keep shining a light on the clowns who think legacy can be bought with a hoodie. Because in the end, the greatest revenge is simple. Build something they can't replace, and then let the silence do the rest.